Welcome to the Astrology for January 2023. This is a guide to help you co-create with the astrological energies, because knowing astrology, it's much like knowing that you don't want to go to Puerto Rico in the hurricane season or avoiding monsoon season somewhere for vacation. It's really similar to the weather. And essentially, I look at the geometries of the planets to note days of intensity, days of harmony, as well as just important themes for the month ahead, and talk about the full and new moon of the month. So I hope you enjoy. So for most of this month, we will have Mercury retrograde. Now we can look forward to Mercury turning direct on the 18th at 8 degrees of Capricorn. But for the majority of the month, it will be retrograde, which, as you probably know by now in your journey of astrology, is not a great time for commencements of new important projects or for anything that involves really clear communication or contracts. It's fine to vision things during the retrograde, but typically, things that get started in a permanent way or in a really formal way over Mercury retrograde can be met with a lot more obstacles, delays, and challenges. So go ahead and, choose to do what you want, but keep that in mind that if you can push things off, like making a car purchase or a house purchase, or, starting a really important business contract, if you can wait till after the 18th, the chances are that it will go more smoothly and linearly than if you do it during the retrograde. However, retrograde can be really beneficial for anything that requires introspection or rearranging things, recalculating, and reconsidering any plans that you have or things that you might have, projects you might have neglected. It can be a good time to go back over things, revise them, edit them, and really reflect on some of the things that you might have put off in a busier part of the cycle. Generally, things get slowed down during Mercury retrograde, especially in this period until the 18th, because Mars for most of that period will also be retrograde. So the new year, it's a really popular time for people who want to jump forward with new goals. And I would just say, don't beat yourself up if you find that there's extra obstacles to, starting that gym membership or starting that new project. Just know that things are retrograde until the 22nd is really like the great time to start everything, because by that time, we won't have any of the major planets retrograde. So keep that in mind and maybe plan more for the Chinese Lunar New Year on January 22nd to really feel like you can make forward action. Until then, use this time to take care of yourself, do things that are more inward. It can be a good time during retrograde to study and learn, because I feel like it allows things to kind of sink more deeply in. And it's like a slower paced time where you can really ruminate on things and let them simmer and ferment more deeply into your consciousness. So Mars goes direct on the 12th and Uranus on the 22nd. And I'll talk more about that when we get to certain dates. So days of intensity. Now, astrology is geometry. So when I pull a chart to look at it, as you'll see later in this slide, I look at the harmonics between planets. So it's all mathematical, and certain planets do favor being in certain signs. And also, when we have a trine or sextile, the energies flow more harmoniously. When we have squares or conjunctions, sometimes conjunctions can work positively, but squares, oppositions generally are more tense aspects, like a 90-degree angle where energy can't flow. So these create what I call days of intensity, when we have more challenging or hard aspects like the square opposition. And specifically when we have Moon and Pluto in hard aspects, because it can feel like emotions and energies are on edge. There's like an edginess we get because both the Moon and Pluto are emotional planets. And when dealing with people who are very emotional beings, we can find that when the Moon and Pluto are not in harmony, that tensions just feel higher. It's not to say days of intensity are bad. Sometimes days of intensity bring forth things to the fore to be resolved, right? So it's not just a doom and gloom thing, but it's just to know in case you want to plan things that might not do the best on a day of intensity, like give an important talk or, something that you have to deal with a lot of people. So on the 1st, we've got the Taurus moon squaring Saturn and the sun squaring Jupiter with Mars on the ascendant, Mars still retrograde. Now, this day could definitely feel like it's hard to make forward progress because we've got the moon squared by Saturn and the expansive Jupiterian energy squaring the sun. So it can just feel like maybe you can't make progress this day. Things just feel a little slower or blocked. The 7th, we've got the moon in Cancer opposite Pluto. And we also have the moon squaring Chiron, which can be a very emotional energy on this day, specifically like old wounds being scratched open. On the 9th, we've got a grand square in the fixed signs. Now, fixed signs are more stubborn, if you will. And so we've got the moon in Leo squaring Uranus, which is the planet of unexpected. And we also have the sun squaring Uranus. So I call this an accident alert. It's within a couple days of the full moon. So it's very likely that this is like an inclement weather day. It's actually been statistically proven by scientists, non-astrologers, that rainfall is much more likely 3 days within the full or new moon. So keep that in mind. So this January 9th day would not really be a good travel day. There might be a lot of unexpected things going on. It could be like I said, little errors or accidents coming up that really get in your way. On the 14th, we've got the moon squaring Pluto, Mercury, and the sun all in Capricorn. And we also have the sun conjunct Pluto and Venus conjunct Saturn. So Venus will be conjunct Saturn for the rest of the month, starting on the 14th. So it's just something to keep in mind. We have the planet of beauty and resources conjunct the planet of restriction, limitation, and it's a cold planet. So Venus, by its nature, benefically wants to expand and nurture, and Saturn can kind of restrict that. Some astrologers say on the plus side that Venus kind of helps Saturn out, but it can be a time where people feel a little more stingy or like they need to pare back their resources or love and affections. On the 21st, we've got the moon conjunct Pluto and the sun conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. So this is just that day of intensity. It could be a really good day for introspection, but it's maybe not the most like friendly social energy. On the 24th, we've got the Pisces moon squaring Mars and the sun squaring Uranus. I might go ahead and say that the 24th is kind of another accident alert. I think it could just be a really emotional, argumentative day because the Pisces moon, for me personally, I feel like I always cry when the moon is in Pisces. It does happen to sometimes square my sun, so maybe that's a personal thing, but let me know. When the moon's in Pisces, have you noticed anything? I notice I get to be sometimes very melancholic. Pisces is the energy that just feels everything. So this can be a day on the 24th where you're feeling everything and everyone's getting in your way. Like you feel extra combative with it squaring Mars. And the sun squaring Uranus, like I said in that earlier date on the 9th, it could be an accident alert. On the 27th, we've got the moon in Aries squaring Pluto. This is another very kind of combative energy when the moon's in fire sign squaring Pluto. And then Mars is squaring Venus. And as always, we still have Venus conjunct Saturn because that will be there the rest of the month. So Mars squaring Venus, conflict with the masculine, feminine principles. Moon squaring Pluto, very kind of intense, in your face energy. On the 29th, we have the moon conjunct Uranus and the sun squaring Uranus and the moon. So this is another kind of sporadic energy day. It could feel kind of unnerving, like your nerves all over the place. A day of heightened energy, a very electrical day. Probably a good time to just lay low, take a bath, discharge all that heightened Uranian energy. All right, let's get into the days of harmony. So on January 4th, we've got Venus in Aquarius sextiling Jupiter in Aries. Mars trining Venus in the air signs, and Saturn, which is actually in its domicile in Aquarius, conjunct the fixed star Deneb al-Jedi, which is a star of abundance, prosperity. So this is actually a date I asterisk because it's a good day for an election working with Saturn. If you want more details on that, write to me, email me, and I can give you, because elections are so time sensitive to the time zone you're in and very exact because you cast the chart for an exact time. If you want to work with Saturn and the benefits of Saturn, like building, structuring, and all that Saturn really can bring in terms of abundance, write to me. I'll give you the specific dates for that election. But just know that it's a kind of fire, air, energized day with the Venus sextile to Jupiter and Mars trining Venus. It's a very supportive energy. The fixed star that I mentioned is connected to Ea, which is a Mesopotamian god who represents the half fish, half man, similar to where we get the glyph of Capricorn, really, the sea goat. And it has a lot to do with the waters that bring forth. So there's a lot of abundance feeling in this day. On the 5th, January 5th, we've got the sun trining Uranus and the sun and the moon sextiling Neptune. So this is a lot of like psychic energy, a lot of good intuitive energy, very creative energy, I would say. Could be a great day to make art, to feel energized and inspired. So on the 11th, we've got a grand Earth trine with the moon, Uranus, and the sun, Mercury, Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. This is a really practical day for planning. Again, it's still in the period where Mars and Mercury are retrograde, so maybe it's the time to get your calendar out and kind of plan your year ahead, or do those things that are kind of the tasks you want to put off or not do because they're not really fun, but they're practical. This is a really good day to do that. Build something, work on something that's going to really last. On the 13th, we've got the sun sextiling Neptune in Pisces and a grand air trine with the moon, Mars, and Venus. I really like the 13th as a social day. It's a nice kind of buzzy energy, really harmonious energies this day. Could be really good for a party, an event, an outing, where you're interacting with people or have to communicate, or maybe you have to give a talk. This would be a great day to plan that. On the 17th, we have the moon in Sagittarius trining Jupiter in Aries. So the ruler of the moon this day is trining the moon. And we also have Jupiter sextiling Mars in Gemini. So there's this fire air energy today, the 17th. And I like this energy for creativity. It could feel like a really creative energy. It could be a great day to do something very active. I think on this day, a lot of people will be feeling like, wow, I feel like I can actually get shit done. Because like I mentioned, this is when Mars goes direct. So you might be feeling really fired up by the 17th to start that workout plan, to go on that expedition. Could be a nice day for travel. On the 25th, we've got Pisces moon conjunct Neptune. So this is a really sensitizing thing for the moon. I like when the moon conjuncts Neptune. I might be biased because I have it natally, and I did a video on if you have it natally in my library, but I think it's a really transcendental moon time. It can be where you can really tune into like the higher sources. So if you like making medicine or doing things where you need to kind of channel, like making music, the moon conjunct Neptune is a great day for that. Would be a great day for a performance. And it's Mars trining Venus as well that day. So the feminine and masculine energies are very harmonious. So that's great for making art. It's really good for healing. I wouldn't say it's a great day for a surgery election, because whenever you've got the moon conjunct Neptune, there can be more confusion. Moon conjunct Neptune is really great for right brain type activities, things that don't require so much precision, but not so good for maybe things that need to be really specific. So barring like a surgery or like a really specific medical protocol, I would say it could be good for just more gentle healing, like getting a massage, going to a spa, doing something that really nurtures you. So there you have it. That's our days of harmony and intensity for the month. Thanks for hanging in there. I hope this is interesting to you. So just to wrap up or recap, let's say, the key dates for January. We've got January 2nd, Venus actually goes into the sign Aquarius. Now, Venus in Aquarius is, it's pretty social, but not in a very like lovey-dovey way. Venus in Aquarius, as many of you know, Aquarius is a more like scientifically minded sign. It's a little detached. So Venus going into Aquarius, people might be feeling with their money, they want to invest more in crypto. Maybe they want to be doing things more along the lines of like tech and technology and science, but not really maybe feeling so connected to other ways Venus likes to express, like in Pisces, which it'll enter by the end of the month. So on the 6th, we've got the full moon in Cancer. So this is obviously the moon in its own sign. I would say it's kind of a day of intensity. The full moon, let's be real, is always kind of a day of intensity. It can feel like it's harder to sleep around full moons, but particularly this full moon because it will be opposing Pluto and Mercury. And so I will talk more about this full moon when I pull up the chart, but I just want you to know that it's definitely a more introspective full moon. January 12th, Mars goes direct, as I've mentioned, and it will be conjunct the fixed star Aldebaran, which has a lot to do with military and honors. On the 18th, Mercury retrograde ends. Thank goodness. We're finally going to be done with Mercury retrograde on the 18th. Though, like I said, Mercury retrograde has its merits, and you can look forward to Mercury retrograde because wow, it can be a potent time for visioning, dreaming, paying attention to the symbolism in your dreams. On the 21st, we have the new moon in Aquarius. Now, the new moon's usually a time where people feel tired and more inward, but I actually think that the moons are kind of flipped this month. I feel like the full moon's going to feel more introspective, whereas this new moon is really energizing and very auspicious for seed planting. All new moons are, if you follow lunations and moon manifestation. But this particular new moon in Aquarius is going to be really good for getting the kind of assistance you need in new beginnings and starts to projects. On the 22nd, Uranus goes direct. Now, I believe that on this 22nd date, it's going to be a big day. Either there'll be some big headline or breaking news, because Uranus is direct now and it's waking up, you could say, in a square to Saturn. And I have a whole video on my channel about the Saturn-Uranus square that happened. Mostly we felt it when the strictest COVID lockdowns were happening back in 2021. Now, we kind of forgot about it because Uranus has been retrograde since last August. So we kind of thought, all right, everything's back to normal. And I think when Uranus goes direct on the 22nd, that we might see restrictions of some kind coming back in. Venus is involved in this configuration, so it might have something to do with like women's rights. I'll talk about this more when I pull the chart for it in a later slide, but I just want this to be kind of on people's radar that luckily all the planets are direct, right? But some of those planets are in a hard aspect to other planets, and we might see instability happening again, seismic activity, etc. And it's not to spread fear, but it's just to be aware that Uranus is going to wake up and he likes to disrupt things, especially when he's in a square to Saturn. So themes of like the past versus the future could also feel like there's a lot of tension going on there, or new innovations in science. On the 26th, Venus moves into Pisces. So Venus is then going to be exalted in Pisces. Now, for parts of February, Venus will be squaring Mars still, so keep that in mind. But there may be dates, especially when Venus moves into Pisces, that would be good for planning things pertaining to physical beauty, resources, and money management, because Venus is in its exaltation in this sign. So if you have like a big makeover you plan to get, or like a cosmetic surgery, I wouldn't advise it while Venus is in Aquarius. I would say push it back to when Venus goes into Pisces and make sure that it's not squaring Mars. Alrighty, so I'm going to talk about the full moon, the new moon, and the 22nd of January. So the full moon, as I mentioned, it will feel more introspective because we've got the moon in the water sign Cancer, trining Neptune, and the south node of the moon. It can be a very sentimental feeling time, and it can be a time that you want to kind of just introspect. Now, why do I say that? Well, the moon is in the lunar mansion Altarf, which is considered to be the gaze or the glance, and it's considered a time of contemplation. The moon in this lunar mansion, it's not recommended to travel. It's more of a time to go deep within yourself and gain some self-understanding. Full moons are traditionally seen as releasing, so it's kind of like releasing what you don't need. And by the end of the month, when we finally have the new moon, you might want to begin building on those projects. The Sabian symbol for the moon at 16 degrees Cancer is a man before a square with a manuscript roll, which has a lot to do with ancient wisdom and deep reflection of the past and honoring, tradition and wisdom from the past and connecting with that thread that's woven throughout all of time. So I think because the moon is also trining Neptune and the south node, this is a good time to connect to spiritual wisdom of other times, do some deep introspection. It's opposite Mercury and Pluto, so it's not necessarily a great time, again, because Mercury is retrograde, for traveling or taking on too many commitments or making extra appointments that you don't need to make. Don't overstretch yourself this full moon. I would say it's a great time to take a bath and listen to an audiobook. That would be my recommendation. And because it's opposite Mercury, there's a deep kind of willingness to go into introspection state. Mercury is also conjunct Pluto, really reflecting in a deep way. Because the moon and Mercury are opposite here, it could be a time where you're feeling the need to balance your heart with your mind. On the new moon, this is the end of the month, on January 21st, we have the sun and the moon at 1 degrees of Aquarius. Now, I also just wanted to note about that full moon and also the new moon. Like I said earlier, these could be days that are more inclement in weather, so they're really good for maybe laying a little more low in general, because it's the middle of winter, right? We know it's really, really cold. There's all this Aquarius energy. Just keep in mind that the weather might be more inclement. So we have the sun and moon at 1 degree of Aquarius, and the Sabian symbol for this is a old adobe mission in California. So it really represents the pieces of history, the architecture of history that stands the test of time, buildings that are kind of meant to create a sense of connecting to source and community. As we know, Aquarius is a very humanitarian-oriented sign. And the lunar mansion that the moon is occupying is Al-Saad Al-Saud, which is a wish-making mansion of the moon. And it's considered the luckiest of the lucky. And the symbol commonly associated with this lunar mansion is the mother giving the baby mother's milk. It's seen as a very fertile lunar mansion, and it's seen to represent multiplication, reproduction, abundance, and growth. But as we see with that Aquarius emphasis too, it's like, what can we bring to the kind of collective sphere? So this can be a really good time, as all new moons are, for planting seeds of intention and really taking those action strides towards goals that you were contemplating for the earlier part of the month. You can finally break ground on those things, literally start creating your Adobe building, your whatever you're building and want to create. It can be a really good time to seek help, seek the kind of support that you need for this project. We've got, as you can see, a sextile happening between the sun and the moon and Jupiter and Chiron. So there can be a lot of healing possible at this new moon. The air and fire energy is very yang. It wants to go forth and create. And as I mentioned, we're just a day away here from all the planets, all the major planets being direct. So this is an amazing time to initiate something and to really go big with it, and ask for the help that you need. So the last slide that I have planned is to just talk about Uranus stationing direct. So this will happen the day after that new moon. And like I mentioned, this could be a time that we collectively see some big news breaking, perhaps seismic activity with the Uranus and Taurus happening. It's a very electrifying energy. Uranus and Taurus, as we've seen throughout the year, has led to a lot of seismic activities, volcanic activities. It definitely represents Uranus changes within the Earth, Taurus. And because the Moon, Saturn, and Venus are all squaring Uranus in this configuration, it might have to do with our economic resources or women's rights, which are represented by Venus. And like I said, it can be the new Uranus coming into conflict with the old way of doing things. So people can come into tension because they feel, wait, this isn't how we've done things before, and a new kind of order trying to be created, and people rebelling with saying, well, no, this is how we want to do stuff. We want to do stuff the old way. So you can see a clash of that. You can also see innovation and breakthroughs within science. But as I mentioned in my video on this topic of Saturn square Uranus, sometimes those innovations, like the legislation or the laws, haven't caught up with those innovations. So we can see things that could be potentially harmful that we think are great and futuristic, but we don't know the long-term repercussions of it. And they can be kind of out there. So one last note I want to mention is that Mars is at 8 degrees of Gemini. And because Mars goes direct this month, I wanted to note what that degree, the Sabian symbol of 8 degrees Gemini is. It's actually an industrial strike. So I found this really interesting. We could see more kind of civil unrest towards the end of this month, particularly because that symbol really shows the clash of people not feeling like organizations supporting them. So a key word for it is kind of protest. So we might see that there's more kind of discontent, social discontent during the end of the month, and could trigger people wanting to kind of tighten the belt on resources and conserve their energy with Venus conjunct Saturn. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this has inspired you to move in harmony with the planets and feel empowered when you are planning, important things in your life, important milestones you want to reach, and feel in tune with what we all are going through, because we all share this experience at this time. And so it's really special to have this language of astrology to help us understand the themes that are coming up for us on a collective level. As always, if you would like personal help or personal consultations, I do natal chart astrology, which is much more based on your specific birth time and your specific kind of blueprint or soul's map. I also help with electional astrology, which is planning important dates. And I've done astrology for business as well. And I can connect astrology a lot of the times in my practice with healing and the herbs and plants that we can use for healing. So check out my website to find out more on these offerings. I thank you very much for being here with me. Have a beautiful rest of your day.